if your employer is logging every keystroke and taking screenshots of your screen every few minutes, that's a little bit less like work and more like a huge civil rights violation. You're looking at privacy concerns. Employees are going to revolt. It's going to be a mess.
Well, Troy, from a threat detection and engineering standpoint, telemetry is telemetry. If that employee is using a corporate laptop to touch corporate data, you're either having full visibility or you have a breach you just can't see.
Okay, so you guys are talking about enterprise risk. I'm more worried about flock cameras around my neighborhood and just around town. These solar-powered ones, right? Because I don't necessarily need anyone knowing when I'm coming and going from my home. So I think what I'm more worried about is, I guess, how do we all agree to be tracked 24/7?
That's right. This week, we're talking about how much privacy should you expect and how much surveillance should employers have on their employees. On this week's episode 51 of the DTF Cyber Podcast, I'm Damien.
This is Troy.
And it's your boy, Fern. Let's go!
So, Fern, you're worried about these flock cameras in your neighborhood?
In general, I tend to do a little bit of scrolling on YouTube every now and then. And more so recently, I've seen these things about flock cameras. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. Because I'm used to the cameras at the stoplights, right? 20 years ago, you'd go by traffic or you go through an intersection, and you would see the little camera up top, right? Occasionally here and there. Now they're everywhere. And I understand why they're there, right? Because accidents tend to happen at intersections and safety things. And I believe there's sensors on those cameras for fire departments to come through, right? If your house is burning, you want the fire truck to make it through the light safely. So I get why they're there. I don't necessarily understand why these cameras are in other places now. And I started looking into it. And from what I can see, even China has more privacy than the US based on the number of flock cameras per citizen. That to me seems like, where did this come from? Because I didn't realize this until 2 months ago.
Well, I think in the news too, there have been cities that have are trying to back out of this flock system, or their residents are saying we don't want them. So I think this is an interesting topic, and it kind of rolls right into what your employer does in terms of surveillance of your activities or making sure data is not stolen. So this is a really good conversation, because when it comes to the flock cameras, I think there's a natural need, right, to be able to track, let's say, a child gets kidnapped. Yeah. Those flock cameras are super valuable in that case because they can track the potential kidnapper in their car to exactly where they've been, where they're going, and where they are right now to save that child's life. So in my mind right now, I think there's a lot of benefits for that, but I know that you guys have some concerns around privacy and maybe your late night poker sessions, grabbing ice cream. Do the cops, when they pull you over, know that you're coming from the casino? Who else can get access to that?
Yeah, and also who's running the systems? We've seen in the news where even officials, law enforcement officials, have used these camera systems to track, their relationship partners. So, can we really trust that the government or these officers individually are going to use them with the utmost integrity and ethics?
And I think that's what started this whole thing, Troy, with one of the cities here in Arizona voting to get rid of the flock cameras. I think there was a police chief that was using it for personal reasons. Oh, really? Which is probably against the privacy violation of the use of those cameras. So let me ask you this, Troy, from a compliance governance standpoint, what would you expect to be in place for that type of data and acceptable use for that type of data?
Yeah. So on the law enforcement side, if you mean the officers who are accessing that data, access logs are crucial, the output. So there's the National Crime and Information Computer System, NCIC, is what all of the warrants and, background checks for people when the police run your background on the side of the road. They put you through NCIC if there's any wants or warrants. That'll come up. This computer system, I was an administrator back in the day, and it is like you have to get almost a security clearance to run it. You have to have access logs. They have to see who is searching for what. And honestly, even back in the early 2000s and late 90s, officers were abusing the NCIC system to run the license plates of cars that they shouldn't have or for nefarious reasons. So there's always going to be some people, bad apples, in law enforcement or in any industry that are going to use the technology for the wrong reasons. So I would expect that there should be a lot more compliance and regulations around how we handle the data, who can access the data, and the audits, the compliance side of that, the governance, who is watching the watchers, basically, who's reviewing those logs, who is ensuring that somebody's not using this for personal reasons versus, police legitimate reasons, like you mentioned, in a kidnapping situation or in an Amber Alert, a Silver Alert. These things are super critical to finding out where these people may be going or heading, but they can be used for very bad reasons. If you saw the news recently, there was a man who was tracked from his home in Illinois. He crossed state lines into Indiana to buy marijuana legally, and he brought it back into Illinois, and the flock cameras had tracked all that. The officers just assumed that's what he was doing in Indiana, and they stopped him once he was back in Illinois and arrested him for the marijuana possession. That is a super big question mark about the use of this system, to track someone's movements, almost Orwellian in that nature.
Yeah, but if it's illegal, it's illegal, right? I mean, I don't feel like I'm oversimplifying it. Like, you can't.
Well, the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution says every person is secure in their persons, places, papers, and things, so that unreasonable wants and warrants and searches cannot happen. And so what was the reasonable suspicion for police to follow that one person? Did they violate his constitutional rights? Perhaps. We as citizens have a direct right to our privacy without a reasonable suspicion. And so did this rise to that level? Maybe. But I'm saying, what if they can watch this person, and follow his actions and assume his intent, what could they do to any one of us?
Okay. I was thinking more so that from the lens of so in Arizona, marijuana is legal, to some extent, I believe, right? So you can buy it, you can use it. You probably can't sell it. I doubt you can sell it, but you can't travel across state lines with it, right? On an airplane, right? Clearly, that's just not what you do. But if you're driving in your car, you can technically cross state lines. I think what you're saying is the probable cause issue, right? You're essentially keeping track of someone, and you're just making the assumption that they have something that they shouldn't, when if the camera wasn't there, there would be no suspicion otherwise, right? So it's more or less like, what was that movie where they predicted people were going to do the crimes in the future with Tom Cruise?
Minority Report?
Okay, so like that, it's like these cameras are essentially nudging people to say, hey, it's very possible, but okay, so let me ask you about this, because I think this idea kind of crosses into security, because when you're tracking insider threats, you're looking at intent, right? You're looking at actions, and you're looking at potential intent. You're taking context from telemetry within your network, and you're putting all that together, and you're saying, we believe this to be the case, right? When it comes to DLP or insider threat, or just overall any sort of attack surface risk, people in security are taking all this information, they're bringing it together, and they're making a conclusion on a person or some action that's being done within the environment.
Well, here's a difference, though, right? There's similarities here that Troy has, some of the things that he's talked about. One of the differences here is that you cannot track, and I would never authorize this, right, to track a specific employee without any kind of
Consent?
Well, not necessarily consent, but let's say there has to be probable cause that something is happening. For example, I'm not just going to go and look at an employee's surfing history just because I'm interested in what they're surfing for.
Yeah.
Right? That is a violation of privacy. You would probably want to stay away from that type of activity. And I think nowadays, within Europe, employees can request how you use their data and what surveillance have you run on them in the past 3 to 5 years. I think there's now some regulation there where you have to give that to the employee on
Oh,
their
really? Okay.
request. So if we have ever looked at their surfing history, we should be able to pull that up in an audit and say, this is when the times we look at your surfing history. Now, a lot of that stuff within the context of security data and logging is gathered. If you're using an employer system, it can be gathered. I'm not saying like every employer gathers it, but there's logs. I'm saying I don't think there's a case to be monitoring that to specific activities unless the system picks it up, right? So we would today have some sort of machine learning or AI that would look at it and say, hey, there's a risk happening here, and then draw an alert to it, which would have an investigation.
Yeah, and Damien, I think this actually is another correlation to the flock cameras because we've had surveillance type cameras for years, convenience stores, red lights, as Fern mentioned. The challenge now is the use of AI in those cameras. So the flock cameras specifically can use AI to help, correlate similarities, find anomalies, just like in corporate America when we do that in the SIEM. And I think with AI, now we have that user's browser history in the log somewhere. We don't look at it without authorization, but now AI can touch that data and say, oh, well, look what he looked at this website, and then this other thing happened over here, and now they're correlating things, and AI is looking at the employee's personal browsing data without permission, without asking, without telling. So all this stuff that kind of correlates to the flock cameras, that's the problem. That's why flock has become so famous so quickly, is because of all the AI that's being used in those cameras to correlate disparate events.
Yeah, but
does that sound familiar?
What you're saying before, right? The examples of the flock cameras were not the AI examples. Like we can get into that. I think that's a completely valid, argument. But right now it's just the people, the administrators, the people that have access to the data. What are they doing with that? And should they be actually looking at, Fern's normal behavior? And is that
and how are we safeguarding that? Right?
Right.
That's the question for both corporate America. How are we safeguarding that access, and for the flock cameras? I agree.
Yeah, if you guys looked at my search history, you wouldn't find anything interesting, right? But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't want some sort of privacy, right? Regardless of what I'm doing. It kind of reminds me of like my kids. Like they're now 10 and 13, right? 3 or 4 years ago, they were never in their rooms, right? We had our house where they were in our rooms all the time. Now, whenever I get home and I walk around, their doors are closed. It's like they don't want us knowing what they're doing, right? So they've kind of gone through this progression of like not caring to keeping us away from whatever they're doing at all times. And I kind of feel like that happens in business, right? Where people have a certain position and say, oh, it's not a big deal. But then at some point I think they recognize that it's like, it's worth keeping what you're doing private. Not to say you're doing anything bad, but just maybe it's just more of like an internal thing.
Well, to go back to Troy's point, we've always had cameras around. You just didn't notice them.
You
Right.
mean like on the streets?
Well, everywhere,
Well, yeah.
right? And I think AI and the amount of data it can go through has probably made that information a lot more dangerous.
In what way? So like you're saying it's more
Exactly.
dangerous to have access to what people are doing when they're doing it, and
No, just how accurate some of these cameras are and the detection. So, for example, in a casino, we know that there's facial detection,
oh yeah,
right? So as soon as you walk in,
they know.
they probably know who you are. You go and get a casino player's card. Well, they scan your driver's license that has your picture on it.
Mm-hmm.
And they can do facial recognition against your picture. So every time you walk in, they kind of know you're there. Then I don't know how they use that information, but I do know they use it for people that they ban from the property, trespassing. And they'll use that to remove people from the property.
Mm-hmm.
So that has gotten obviously a lot better as well. Now, in the news, and I don't know, Troy, if you've seen some of this, there have been false detections or identification of people that look similar. And
Absolutely.
it's not the right person.
But they're not, okay. So, but they're not being accused of anything. They're just being, we'll say, apprehended for a second. But it's like,
maybe sometimes even longer. I saw a body cam clip of somebody actually going to jail, and it wasn't even the right birth date. but they thought it was a fake ID, but it was a real ID. And the guy didn't even have the same name, but his face looked the same. So I don't know how, how many of these mistakes happen.
It's unsettling, that's for sure. And you're thinking now we're relying on technology. In this case, Damien, we're relying on technology to take away someone's freedom and put them in jail for something they did not do because the AI and the cameras thought he looked similar to a person that did, even though his identification clearly showed that it was not the person. So are we living in a world where it's arrest first, ask questions later? Are we relying on the computers full time now? Fast
forward to corporate. Have you ever heard of somebody being fired for an activity they actually didn't do?
Oh, all the time, right? Yeah, absolutely.
I have.
It has nothing to do with cameras, but I mean,
no, like data. Let's say, somebody gets accused of exfiltrating data when maybe it was a mistaken identification of the user ID or the laptop or just a system malfunctioning. AI.
Yeah, I mean, hackers are great at obfuscating who's doing what. I have seen employees be, blamed for something that was definitely a third-party nefarious hands-on-keyboard hacker. But in today's world, I think that we're smart enough to know that you can't make a full condemnation without all of the evidence and being certain. And then, of course, HR is always involved in those discussions, and you bring in outside, forensics sometimes to help you confirm who did what hand on keyboard. And a lot of times it comes out of the interview with the employee. They admit to it or they don't. But it is hard today, even with malware. Like the NSA and CIA, they do attribution for malware sometimes, but they know that the threat actors use techniques to make it look like a different threat actor group. And so 100% attribution is almost impossible at times.
I would say this, right? If you work in a SOC and you're doing investigations, and I think this should apply to, obviously police detective work as well. You have to keep an open mind and only present the facts. And so when we're investigating whether an employee has exfiltrated data, it may not be that employee, like you said, Troy. It could be malware on that endpoint. It could be a malicious actor that is pretending to be that employee. And so when we do these investigations, we are simply presenting facts to HR or to legal to say, this is what we see. We want to be able to investigate the potential that it isn't that person at all. So there is a lot of facets to that, but you can't be biased in your investigation, no matter what investigation you're doing, whether it's a data security investigation or police work.
100%.
Yeah, but it still feels like you're being micromanaged, even if you're not, right? Because if you have okay, I guess let me think about this. If you take a step back and look at it through the lens of what amount of data is being collected about what people are doing, the more that you collect, it feels more like a surveillance system, right? But in some cases, like in the situation where people have falsely been identified as something, right? The more information they have, they can probably go back and look to see, hey, like this actually wasn't them. It reminds me of there's a lot of crimes where people's cell phones are being tracked through their connection to towers, right? They can triangulate someone's position based on the towers that they're connected to through their providers, right? But that requires and Troy, tell me if I'm wrong here, that requires the state or whatever prosecutor to subpoena these organizations to request that information, right? So there is essentially some sort of governance on who has access to the information, the providers that have it and the government that wants it. And so they can actually request it. But what this does is essentially it kind of blurs that line to where whoever has the cameras has the access, whereas before it's kind of like...
Yeah, so in this case, even those towers, the triangulation, what's to stop the administrator who have admin rights or maybe the root access to that system from going in and tracking their X and their movements, right? So it's not just one entity, like a government entity or a police entity, trying to subpoena that data. It's the data that already exists within that organization and who has access to it and how are they using it.
Exactly. It's like the administrator of that system saying, "Oh, my wife said she was going to be at the nail salon in Scottsdale, but she's pinging on the tower in Awatuki. What's going on?"
She's getting in Tukey trouble right now, doing something. I guess I can understand that too. So, yeah, I guess it really comes down to who has access, right? Because not everyone should have access, but even the people that do, are they using it in good faith? Maybe is the right.
So let's transition over back to corporate America again for 1 second, because when you sign up to a company, generally you will agree to terms. Like when you sign up for your job offer, you'll get an offer and you'll go through the company policy and handbook. You don't have to accept the terms in the handbook where it says we can take a screenshot every 30 seconds because we don't trust you, or, we're logging your keystrokes. You have a choice there. If you choose to stay and abide by those, doctrines or policies, that's a choice that you make. But then there's also regulation, like in Germany, as example, with the Workers' Council and how strict they are. You might not even be able to put CrowdStrike or Sentinel-1 on some of those machines because of the data that it collects about the employees' usage of that system. So it's not only that the employee agrees to the policies and has to live with the consequences of whatever that means. There's also regulations, and privacy can, even state by state, depending on where the employee is, there are different regulations that tell an employer what they can and cannot have access to, collect, and use that data for. So I think there's a lot more controls for an employee than there are for a citizen in a car with flock cameras collecting data on them that they have no idea about.
Yeah, but
so
how
whole
many
premise is,
how many employees sign that acceptable use policy, or the employer, what the employer is actually doing
without
their
reading
data,
it?
without reading it, because it's a job.
of course.
So they just sign it and then they forget. They
Yeah.
forget what's in there. Now most companies have this in their compliance training, so you have to sign off on it every year. But most people don't. They don't remember.
That's
right?
like the
And so let me give you an example. So if you have a corporate laptop,
Mhm.
right? You got a company issued laptop. We know that there's probably tools on there that are collecting various telemetry.
Okay.
What if you decide to job hunt?
You don't do it on your work computer.
Well, some people forget.
They sure do. I've seen this a lot, Damien, where they come to me and say, "Hey, look, so-and-so's looking at Indeed and applying for jobs."
And
You know?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn has a
Mhm.
jobs. I mean, you just have to look for I don't know what the URL is, but yeah, you can see it.
Yeah, it's like a click to apply or whatever. It takes you to like a separate area, I think.
My first answer to that is always, "So what?" I'll be a reference for my employees if they want to leave. I've told you this, guys, in the past. You want to make a culture where people want to be at work. You want to provide an environment of rewards and incentives to be there. But if an employee chooses to leave, you certainly would encourage them to follow and better their self and better their family, better their career path. And I'll be the first one to step up and give them a reference
Most cases,
if that's what they choose to
true,
do.
Troy. But the problem is if they're going to a competitor, right? Like we've seen lawsuits between like the big tech companies. Was there like somebody that left Tesla and went to Facebook?
I mean,
somewhere, anyways, right? And maybe has being accused of taking proprietary information with them, and so you don't want to get into that situation either. And the employer wants to get ahead of that to make sure we're not going to lose. It's fine if you lose the person, but are you going to lose other information to a competitor?
Yeah, and I guess the other side of that too is like someone could be looking to help a friend out. Just because they're on Indeed doesn't mean they're looking for themselves. Like I've had people ask me if I knew of anything. I'm like, oh, let me just check it out. Like let me like I'm obviously looking for something different than like a sales role. So it's if someone were to collect that info, they'd be like, oh, like what does he think he's doing?
But the AI doesn't know that.
No, I know. That's why I'm saying it's kind of like the other side of the coin is where there are people that help their friends find things, right? And if they happen to be on an Indeed or doing something, and it's not even they're not even doing what you would expect.
Not even their fault. Again, if an employer is going to fire you point blank for being on a job hiring site, that's terrible. They should at least give you an opportunity to explain what you were doing for a friend. But again, I think it goes back to the difference between flock cameras and corporate America. Even how many of us have read the Apple T's and C's? They're like 30 pages long. Who knows what Apple's collecting about us on our own iPhones, et cetera.
Oh yeah, Apple, Google.
Yeah, all of those.
Everything.
We don't read those, but my point is the employees at least have some sense that, hey, I'm working for this company. This is their property as a laptop. They're probably collecting some data about me and what I do on this machine. People driving their cars to go get late night fast food, as Fern mentioned, there's no knowledge that the camera is snapping pictures of them, collecting their license plate data, correlating where they're going. There's a fine line between privacy and security. They never trade your freedom for security, because if you do, you won't have either. But my point is, don't give up just because that. But where does that line go? If you're in a public place, the whole premise is, this is publicly accessible data in a public place where you have no right to privacy or no expectation of privacy. So I think that the flock camera is going to be a very hot topic for the next 6 months. I can't wait to see how it turns out. I'm not advocating for either side. I think it has great uses in law enforcement. I think it could cross the line for privacy advocates. So I just am waiting to see what happens in the courts, Damien.
And I think that's why my question was around what do you think has to happen around the governance of that data? Because I don't see the cameras going away. May get some pushback now and probably has some bad publicity, but really, how do we lock that down to stop, the authorities from misusing that information? Because that should never be allowed. And I don't know if the punishments are big enough. So if somebody violates your rights and your privacy, what is the punishment for that person? And I don't think it goes far enough.
Yeah. I guess my thought on it is just like, if something were to happen to anyone's kid, doesn't matter who it is, they would want any piece of information to help them find their kid, whether they're lost. There was one time we were living in Mesa, and our mother-in-law came over, and she's partially blind, right? So she can't really see. And so she came over our house, knocked on the door, and our oldest now at the time was 2, maybe 3. So she opened the door, she came in, and then she closed the door. What she didn't realize was that our daughter stepped outside, right? So we're inside. I think I was in the kitchen. My wife was doing something upstairs. And then we're like, hey, where's the kid at? Right? Like, we can't find our kid in our house. And it was around Easter, because I remember I was like, where would she go? So we're like, we can't find her in the house. And so we go outside and we start looking. And like, we're just like walking around the neighborhood looking for her. And like, I'm running down one street, my wife goes down the other side, shouting her name because she's old enough to know her name. And then what ends up happening is my wife goes to the park that's like right down the street, and she's playing with Easter eggs in the grass. Right. Wow. And it's like, that was a very unique situation where, our mother-in-law is kind of essentially blind. So she didn't see any of this happen. So it's, a mistake. But in my mind, I think like that's a crazy situation. And if there was a camera that could capture, right? If there's a camera that could have captured.
Well, there are now.
Yeah.
Right. Like even your Ring camera will, if you have a doorbell camera.
Oh yeah. The motion.
Yeah. Somebody walks, it actually tells me Amazon delivery person is placing a package. It's so accurate now.
Yeah.
It will even say a child is playing on the porch.
Mm-hmm. So that like, it's good in those instances, like, or if something happens, it's good, but then it's also like, do you always want them to have that information?
Yeah. So who has access to those Ring cameras and the data in there? And can they be using that to surveil my house to know when I leave?
Yeah, that was one of the most controversial Super Bowl commercials this year, was the Ring camera commercial where it says, hey, if you lose your dog, we're going to automatically look at all the cameras in your neighborhood and see if your dog's on camera and get your dog back. And that sounds like a great idea, but then privacy experts are like, what? You're now using my camera data to track people and dogs, and this. It was kind of, this backlash from that was tremendous. I don't think Ring expected it. But, last night my Ring camera says there was a fox in the front porch. It was just a stray orange cat, but it did look like a fox. But I mean, yeah, it's getting better and better at determining what's out there. But, Fern, that feeling of your child being missing is the worst. We were in Lake Tahoe when Mackenzie was much younger, maybe 6, 7, at a family reunion, and we thought that she was with the aunts and uncles, and they thought that she was with us. She had actually stepped out and went several blocks down the street to the beach. And, that search, not knowing where your child is in a place like Lake Tahoe, where it was very busy for the summertime, I couldn't imagine losing my child, but that was the first time I felt that pit in my stomach where, oh my God, this is terrible. Running up and down each street, as you mentioned, calling her name. Finally some good citizens said, "Hey, are you looking for a little girl about 5 years old? She just went that way." Got her back, and oh my God, just wanted to hug her for hours.
It's like we had the baby cams that monitor the babies if you're not in the same room with them. So those still exist. Then you got the nanny cams if you don't trust your nanny. Right. Some people put cameras in still keep it like you're talking about your daughters, but they'll keep cameras where the kids are just to keep an eye on them. They watch their dogs on cameras. So we're already doing that sort of thing because we want to protect what's valuable to us, right? Or at least know what's going on. Mm-hmm. The question though is who else has that data, because it's syncing to a cloud somewhere, and not just that we're worried about the cloud providers and the data storage of that provider. What about hackers that get in and get access to that data?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought of like these flock cameras on every.
But so that's the question though, would you give up the ability to find a child over privacy? And I think that's the question.
Well, I think there's a fine line, is depending on who you ask, is would you do it to find your child, right? Because I think everyone would say yes. If it's my kid, yes. But the minute it's someone else's kid and it's their privacy that's on the line, they're like, no. So I feel like a lot of these positions that people have are self-serving, right? And they should be, right, to some extent. But it's like, would you want anyone to have access to this camera to find your kid? Well, duh. But now it's, someone you don't know that lives, 1,000 miles away. Okay. Right. Like, I think people have less interest as they have less perceived value from the information for themselves.
Well, from a business standpoint, right? The organization has millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars in their company.
Yeah. So they're serving their own interests, right?
They need to protect what's right for that organization, so that they don't lose the proprietary information that they're trying to protect. So from that perspective, I want to be able to have as much data as possible on anything that the employee might be doing that's out of the norm, right? Now, would we be looking at it with, every single step, every single action that employee is doing? No, right? And we do not do that. And most organizations don't do that. They shouldn't. We have regulations in place. And like you said, Troy, there's ones in Europe. There's now stricter ones in the United States. I think California is one of the states that has a little bit more stricter policy on what you do with personal information. We're just not going to, break into somebody's privacy just because we feel like it. And there's so much data out there. That's not the intent, right?
We're not, Damien, you're right. We're not, but are people doing that now as far as administrators or security teams?
No, I think you have clear guidelines to say, okay, if you're caught doing this, that's immediate termination. For me, if there were one person on my team that was violating somebody's privacy, let's say just opening up an email. So we do have policy around, if you're going to open up somebody's email, there has to be a ticket, and there has to be an active investigation. There has to be, now if it's, if you go up the chain, there's somebody more important, now you need HR's approval to even open that mail, right? So if you violate that, it's you would be terminated immediately. I have my team knows that. If you violate this, you will be terminated without question.
So let me ask you a question though. How easy is it for someone to do that and avoid the system? Because you said there's a ticket.
Well, that's why you have logs, right? So you would have a log. We do have logs anytime somebody has leveraged that access to open an email, any email.
So there's no way that they could do it without that being recorded in some way.
Right.
Okay.
It's recorded.
Okay.
And now there has to be an audit trail back to approvals or tickets and things like that, investigations.
Mhm.
It's very similar, right? If you get pulled over, I mean, do you allow the police to search your car if they say, "Do you mind if I take a look?"
I always say
Right.
no.
So then the question is, do you sit there and wait for the dog to come and sniff, and do they have the right to hold you beyond the traffic violation? So there's all these rules and policies in place that protect your rights. Now, we've seen, YouTubes that those are not always followed by some people in law enforcement, but for the most part, so that's why I'm saying that punishment for violating that needs to be stricter, because it doesn't help if somebody violates your privacy in a traffic stop. Even if they get terminated from their job, they end up in the next county over working for,
Yeah, exactly.
So there needs to be some sort of, if it's a repeated behavior of somebody violating a person's rights, there needs to be punishment. And the same thing happens within the security team. We have access to a lot of data.
Yeah.
So we have to treat that with the utmost respect to not violate the trust of the organization and the people that we are serving. The biggest problem, though, and my worry, are not the employees.
It's someone else.
It's somebody else that gets access to the system, and that's why we do things like the layers of defense and multi-factor, zero trust. I mean, there's reasons why we protect that data.
Yeah. So it kind of when you're saying that, Spider-Man's out now. I don't know if you guys have seen Spider-Man. It's a really good
I have
movie.
not seen it, so no spoilers.
No spoilers. Spider-Man is probably it's actually a really good movie, this more recent one. But what does Aunt May say? With great power comes great responsibility, right? And I think it's true when it comes to all this data that's being collected. Is there's a lot of power in what that information can provide someone, right? But there's also a requirement of responsibility for the people that own it, right? And I like what you said, Damien, where if, because I don't run an IT shop, right? Or I don't run an IT department or in security, like for a department, right? So I don't know how some of these logs and things would work, like how you guys have it set up. So I'm asking these questions, but I do like the idea that everything that's done is tracked and logged, and that you guys have very clear boundaries on what can and can't be done. And if someone goes outside of that, it's career ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't like about a lot of things that you hear online when it comes to, like, we'll say, like the police departments, there's always times where the cameras just happen to turn off, right? They just happen to be off. And I think with cell phones and, I'd be worried, like, if we were back in the 70s, like how much people lost their right to privacy, or essentially their laws were broken, right? Because they didn't have cell phones to record these things that were happening. And then now you have these, cameras on the chest. But it reminds me of a situation where the more there is benefit to having all this data, I think outweighs not having it at all. Because if you were to compare the number of situations that would happen, we're going to say in the southeast of America in the 60s and 70s compared to what happens now, I would venture to say that there's a lot less that happens now because of the cameras in particular, and people and their own cameras. So it sets a precedent and moves the trend in the right direction for the people that could have their rights violated, right? But it also kind of creates this issue where if you don't have the right guardrails in place, then you find yourself in a really tough situation. So I think at the end of the day, what really matters is if you're going to collect this data, you have to make sure you protect it to the extent that, like, this is like scorched earth if it were to get out. But I think that's the problem is I'm not convinced that people have those policies in place at the government level to force people to not take certain actions that would break or, kind of cause issues to the citizens. Because you guys have it at work, right? Clearly you have logs. I mean, Troy worked in law enforcement. Like, would you say it's comparable, Troy, to how things are being done at the business level? Like how Damien described it?
I think it goes department by department, right? I think the FBI and some of our larger police departments have struggled with these questions that you talk about, Fern, from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it's caused a public trust problem. And so one bad apple spoils the bunch. In general, police officers are amazing humans who, put their life on the line every day for citizens. But there are those one or two that make bad decisions, violate people's rights, So I think that it's the same problem in corporate America with what we're doing here. I have had employees that have done wrong things like what Damien's talking about. And yes, it is a career ender for me once we find it. But there are still people willing to take that risk for the wrong reasons out there. So one bad apple in our corporate America, absolutely. One more bad apple in law enforcement, absolutely. I mean, it's not looked upon the way it used to be. What I mean by that is like there used to be the good old boy cover-up system where even if there was a bad apple, the other police officers would kind of look the other way. But today, when something like that happens, good officers will out the bad officer and testify against them and come forward. You never saw that 10, 20 years ago. So I think hopefully in corporate America that'll translate.
Nobody expected that they were going to be recorded. I think the biggest one was probably Rodney King, right?
Yes.
I don't think the police officers knew or suspected that they'd even be recorded. And could you imagine if they weren't?
Mm-hmm.
So, today, though, I think you should assume when you're in public, you're on a camera somewhere.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. I'm not worried about flock cameras. You know why?
Why?
Because I have so many cars that I'll just rotate through them.
I thought you were going to say you sprayed the license plate with something to...
No, that's illegal.
Oh, okay.
But you could have like 4 or 5 cars and then drive different paths to go to different places.
This is
so
true.
My path here today.
2 cars?
No, same car, but different path.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Both of you drive giant data centers anyway. I mean, the amount of data in both of your cars, if anybody ever, subpoenaed Tesla or whatever for that, you'd be on the hook for every
just
corner.
my phone. just my phone.
Everything's on the phone.
Yeah.
I think maybe when you guys are both speaking about the law enforcement, I think the one thing that's important to keep in mind too is I think as a human or just as people in general, we tend to always remember the worst things that happen. Like if I were to say, hey, Troy, name the top 5 things that, ruined your day last week, right? It'd probably be easy because you remember that, right? And if I say now name the top, 5 things that made your week, it'd probably be a lot harder. And I forget the psychological part of it, but like people tend to remember more of the negative than they do of the positive, right? You asked me what I ate for dinner last night. Well, I don't know, right? I can tell you I had Andy's ice cream at 11 o'clock at night, but I don't remember dinner. But I think the same is true when it comes to people just knowing and remembering these we'll say bad situations or the negative outcomes more than they do the positive. And I think what ends up happening, even with flock cameras in general, is people bring up a lot of the negative more than the positive benefits, right? Because just by nature of just, I will say, being people, I think people tend to fall in a situation where they have more recollection of the negative. And then that just kind of creates this idea in their head of what the world is like. Perfect example. If all you did is watch the news, you would think the world is ending, the world's burning. They talk about murders, they talk about crimes, they talk about all the negative, right? You never really see a news show where they talk about all the good things that are happening in a community. You only see the bad. So if you only watch the news, you'd think if you walk out your door, it's a terrible place to live. But you walk outside and there's like kids playing, there's people doing, there's donations, there's charities, there's people doing all these good things, but you're never really exposed to it. And I kind of, in some way, kind of wonder how much of this negative press on the flock cameras is just a simple like distillation of all these bad experiences. But what about all the good things that come from it, right? Are we forgetting about that? And are we only focusing on the negative because that's what we tend to do and that's only what the news presents to us?
Well, yeah, I think that's the key right there, Fern, is that, if it bleeds, it leads. That used to be a saying. And I think that negative, sentiment sells newspapers, or today's world, more clicks, likes, and eyeballs. So I think that the negative news is everybody's trying to race to find the more salacious story that'll get more clicks and likes. And that is a race to the bottom.
But that's just capitalism, right? The money is, you chase the money. And I feel like if the news is incentivized to provide the things that sell, they're only selling you, or they're only giving you what helps them sell. And so that means they're only giving you the negative things. And so you kind of create this negative impression of the world that's around you, when the reality is I see, this is probably going to sound dumb, but I don't know what percentage of all events the negative events are. But like you said, Troy, there's way more good officers than there are bad. But people have the perception that law enforcement is terrible, right? Oh, we can't trust the government. We can't do these things. But it's like, how many, out of 1,000 officers, there might be one or two bad ones. But people always assume that those one or two speak for the rest of the population. And I think that's kind of the issue with this here is like, yes, there are some issues with it, right? And yes, there are risks, but like, are people over indexing on the negative part in how they view it versus the other side? And maybe even the same is true with security in business, right? Do people look at security as a certain, subset of what is actually being done, right? You only hear about the breaches, right? They say it takes, you one time to be wrong, but you have to be right every other time, right? It only takes one time. So it's like, out of thousands of times that someone try to get in.
That's because we don't publicize, if we stop an
hundreds
attack,
of thousands of times a day.
Yeah, we don't publicize that. We don't want the attackers to know that, hey, try something else.
Yeah.
But keep trying that. I mean, we'll just kill it, and we can see it, and then maybe see where it's coming from as well, and get some more information on the attackers. So we don't publicize the fact that we stopped an attack, or it's just not something we talk about. Now we don't want to talk about the other side of it either. Anytime there's a breach or an incident, but by regulation, sometimes you have to report those.
Yeah, I just feel like for you guys, because of the positions that you're in, is there's so much more good that happens. There's so much more bad that's blocked than good that's presented, right? But people always say the minute an incident happens or a breach happens, it's everyone knows. But it's like that happened. It's like that happened one time, right? What about the thousands of things that we stop? But like, an incident happens, all of a sudden an executive in security loses their role, their job. But it's like there was so much more good that they created, and so much more bad that they blocked. But the one time it happened, that's all people remember, right?
Yeah, imagine being Thanos for 1 second. 14,270 times he wins, and they make a movie about the one time he loses.
That's a good one. Oh man, that might be the best analogy for the living as a security practitioner. Is the one time that the one time he was able to lose is the one that gets documented, and it becomes like one of the highest grossing movies of all time, right?
That's right?
But that's the thing, is people focus on the negative. What about all the times Thanos lost, or all the other times Thanos won? He snapped and half the world's gone. He saved the world in his eyes, right? But
and then also, if you ask a professional poker player about their wins, they can't remember any of the wins. They always remember in stark detail the bad beats they had. Absolutely. That come out of rounders. But seriously, ask a professional golfer about all the great shots they hit. They don't remember them. They remember that 3-foot putt that they missed.
No, you'll remember a hole in one. Come on.
Yeah.
Well, a hole in one. Yeah, that's true. But I mean, more often than not, they'll remember that 3-foot putt they missed rather than that 340-yard drive down the middle.
Yeah. But I guess the idea is the same. Is like, it doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing. People tend to focus on the negative, right? And the perception of the amount of negative always outweighs the actual relative good that is happening.
Well, I'll tell you, in security, you can't be concerned about that, right? Yeah, you have one incident. Maybe you missed an alert. You can't, just focus on that for the rest of your career. you're going to have to really turn it around real quick and figure out, okay, how do I get better? How does this team get better? How do my metrics and alerting detection get better? You got to have a really short memory when it comes to any type of incident, especially users too. So if a user clicks on a real phishing attack, and let's say the employer loses millions of dollars, does that really stop the business? No, you got to figure out, okay, how do we stop it from happening next time and learn from that bad mistake? And keep going.
Even during an incident, Damien, I think it's important to get the team calmed down, because a lot of times they're ramped up that they missed something or allowed something to happen. And so you really have to calm them down and let's focus. Let's eradicate the threat actors. Let's follow our playbooks. We'll talk about the postmortem afterwards, because I've had SOC engineers just beside themselves that they were, they didn't see something, they missed something, they allowed something to happen in their eyes. And, that during the incident is not the time to be dealing with that. And so I've had to often calm people down, privately on the side. But look, I need your head in the game here, and we need to fix this problem. And we'll talk about how to prevent it from happening in the future another time, but not now.
Well, they're worried about losing their jobs. That's why they're panicking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I wouldn't say, that would cost them their job unless it was, something that
flagrant.
Yeah, It had to be flagrant. It had to been, we purposely turned off these alerts.
Yeah, and didn't tell anybody.
Yeah, and didn't notify management. I think that would be flagrant. But now, if the alerts are coming in and the analyst just missed it or didn't really investigate it fully, and that allowed the attacker extra time, that I think those are lessons learned there at that point.
So kind of drawing this back to flock cameras and security, the world of security, we'll say enterprise security, right? I got a question then. So if you have the ability to collect more information on people or the telemetry or anything happening in your environment, would you do it? If money was no option, or money was no...
The answer is absolutely yes, but it's got to be telemetry that has security implications, right? There's a big difference between user data, about behavioral data, what the user is doing, and network telemetry, the binaries that are running on an endpoint, as an example. That kind of telemetry, the more of it you have and the more you can correlate in a data lake, is super important. The one thing that we don't really is collect or need is, keystrokes and, how often they're on. I think what we see are those type of controls in an environment where it's a remote employee and the employer just doesn't trust that they're working all day like they should be. This is more of an employee problem. And it's not the security team usually using those tools. It's an HR person or a manager who's trying to make sure that their employee is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Completely different from security telemetry. I want as much telemetry as I can possibly have about my cloud, my network, my identity, my data, all the stuff, so that I can put together a complete picture of an attack. And that attack has nothing to do with employee data, what they've been surfing or looking at, nothing at all.
Security doesn't care. I agree. Give me all the data, right? I can figure out how to use it. Two things. One, productivity, Troy, you were talking about. I think, I agree. That's not a security, that's not even an IT conversation.
Yeah.
That's an HR problem.
Yeah.
Usually when HR comes and says, could you tell me how many times this person has logged in? It's not my place to ask them why. It's just, sure, here's the logs, right? Yeah. That's you deal with that with legal, but
with an email, an email and a ticket. Yeah, it's got to be documented.
It's got to be documented.
We never action that without a good paper trail.
But a good HR and manager would have that conversation with the employee, first of all, to say, hey, your productivity's slipping, and have that conversation. If there is activity happening on that front with the employee, and they just want to check that they are logging in at a certain time, because let's face it, IT workers don't have set hours, right? It's not like you have to show up for a shift at 9 a.m. to open the store, right? You might have to show up 9 a.m. for a meeting, but what if you don't have a 9 a.m. meeting? You do have tasks that you have to do. And I'm really worried about the productivity of the team versus the hours and when they're showing up. So that's a little bit different for IT and security. So hopefully the HR has already had that conversation for productivity. Now, I've seen a lot of things where an employee didn't log into their corporate laptop for 3 months. So I don't know what that means. Were they just working off their phone? Were they, can they do their? I can't make any judgment as a security person. I've also seen cases where HR specifically told somebody they cannot work from a specific country because they had requested it, and HR had asked me for origin IP addresses. Turns out they were in that country for 3 months already, right? But those are different reasons. Those, you got tax implications, you got regulations for those countries if you can't work in that country. There's visa issues, work permits. So that stuff I can't even comment on, but I do see a lot of those types of requests, and I see them all the time. I've seen them over the past decade of my career, not just recently. But I'm thinking about like this data aspect. Why can't we de-identify the data to the point where it's not a user, or so it's not a specific user? Like it's not Fern.
Oh, so
it's user ABC. I don't care who the user is. I just care that this entity. And now we're going into agentic. So maybe it's an agentic AI agent that is a threat, right? So if we could de-identify all of that to say, look, I don't necessarily know who it is, but I know that this identity or this laptop or this system.
Hopefully the role as well, because Bruce in accounting is a lot more important than Bruce in another department. So
right.
You want to make sure that the person doesn't have access to financial data or to other crown jewels. That identity matters in that case. Maybe you de-identify Bruce and it's just employee X in accounting, but you still have to be able to correlate and
right. But in that case, you're not violating anyone's privacy, right? You're just looking at it as the data itself. It's just data.
Yeah. So that kind of reminds me of like how a lot of companies now are looking at sanitizing and anonymizing data that goes into LLMs, right? Because they as is running through, we'll say as is running on the wire to these clouds, it gets scanned, right? There are companies out there that can, well, I guess not to get too crazy into it, but they can inspect the traffic, right? And then they can break the traffic and say, decrypt it, read it, sanitize, re-encrypt, and then send off, right?
Well, that's only if you're sending, let's say real sensitive information. So hopefully that system is secure. So if you're sending up, your healthcare records, you'd want that to be, secure. Yeah,
but the idea is there's a form of sanitation that's done before it goes into these tools, right? So to the same idea is anonymize who it is about and just provide the context, right?
I think also to some extent that already happens, because we look at endpoints as IP addresses, we look at MAC addresses. It's very rare that you will use a username as one of the telemetry points, except for when it's a BEC, a business email compromise, and you have to see whose mailbox it's in. But normally we're looking at this from an endpoint perspective of IPs and MAC addresses.
So let me ask you this then. If you could collect any amount of data that you have, even on yourself as a company, and they do it, not necessarily on the endpoint for behavior of HR related issues, you would want that all of that data, right? Money isn't an issue, buy all of it. And then maybe just to some extent anonymize some of it. And then that kind of creates that, not like an air gap system, but it could, like maybe you have a translation table somewhere that is only accessible to certain people, right? So the data is still being collected, but the way that's being collected is in a responsible way to where if anyone were to get access to it, they wouldn't know who it was. They would just know that it exists, right? So is that kind of like the compromise where if you're going to collect it, anonymize it, and then have it where that the way to correlate it?
So yeah, yes and no. Like you're eventually, there are going to be people that can draw the correlation to the actual person. It's just like the flock cameras, it goes off license plates. And if you tie that into, your driver's license and the registration, well, now you know who, somebody in that family, maybe not that person that registered it, who it belongs to and that sort of thing. So there are, there's always going to be a correlation somehow. You just have to be able to lock that data down. And, if the public says, hey, I want to see every time you searched my license plate, you should be able to give that to me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then why? What were the reasons why why did you look at my license plate? I should be able to see that. And I think if they're transparent enough to say, okay, here's all the times your license plate was scanned or queried. I get it. It's going to be scanned at every traffic light, but these are the reasons why they were queried, because maybe you're in the vicinity of a crime, right? So I get that. That's fine. But if you're trying to query that to fish for something I've done that you're trying to get information from, that's not acceptable.
Yeah. You know what this kind of feels like to me as we're talking about it is, we'll say like the use of AI, where people say, hey, go use AI, go do this, go do that. And then a year and a half, 2 years later, like, hey, well, hang on a second. What are you doing? Right. We have to do this. We have to, put guardrails around how we use it. But there was a push to get that information, or push for usage. Right. And maybe in some ways it kind of feels like law enforcement or agencies and governments kind of put these cameras out there to get the information, but they hadn't really thought about, what's acceptable, what's not, how to govern the usage. They just did it, much like people did with AI. Now they're kind of trying to, not necessarily backstepping, but they're trying to find a way to like safely contain the usage, right? So is it people that are just trying to get the information, or is it just people that made a decision without thinking about long-term issues or long-term, let's say, disadvantages to that system? And then now they're like, oh, how do we, is it, you guys think it's the same thing? Like,
I think it's a slippery slope, right? I mean, if you think about all the data that is being collected about each one of us now, based on our browser history, our telephone usage, our rewards at every store that we go to, now flock cameras tracking our movements. There was a book, you might have heard of it, 1984, that talks about a surveillance state, and we may not be there today. I'm not saying that we live in a 1984 Orwellian type world, but the pieces are coming together where every single thing that you do in life, whether it's social credits or your employer or your shopping habits, your social media, there's data out there. It's just going to take somebody flipping the switch and start leveraging it against us. That will be the problem. And so are we headed towards a cliff? I can't predict that one. But just be aware of it is all I can say. Yes, awareness is half the battle. And so that's my thoughts on it. And that's my, for, I guess, final thoughts of the day on that one, it would be just continue doing what you're doing and make sure that you're aware of what's being collected about you.
Damian, let's get your final thoughts on this overall.
Yeah, I think you just assume that you're being watched everywhere when you step outside. In your workplace, you don't expect any
Privacy?
major privacy. I think you will get some privacy. I don't think anyone would necessarily violate it.
Mm-hmm.
But, I'm not necessarily against the surveillance state, but I want to make sure that data is protected. Under the circumstances today, I'm kind of worried about it. So if we can put together some kind of governance and compliance within the organization to protect employee privacy, that is definitely mandatory, and it should apply to these flock cameras as well. Without that data, we just wouldn't be able to see if any breach or incident is happening. So some of the stuff is mandatory for us to protect the organization. And just like we discussed, the flock cameras do come in handy when you're looking for a missing child or a kidnapping victim. So I think the conversation is just getting started. I like that now it's becoming out in the open, and it's not just hidden where there's a few individuals taking advantage of the data that's there. We need to have that better visibility.
Yeah.
Good point.
I keep going back to Troy's thing with Thanos, right? So 14,605 alternative futures is what the actual number was. I know if Troy said 14 million, I don't remember the rest of it, but I'm pretty sure he got the 605. But everyone remembers the time where the Avengers won. But there's so much other good that happened. And in my mind, I have a feeling that everything that we're seeing about the flock cameras as a whole is probably just the negative part, right? So I'll probably take some time to look into maybe some things around the benefits to it. But at the end of the day, like you said, there's no reasonable expectation of privacy in a public setting. But like Troy said, if you're in your car or in your something like your home, there is a level of expectation. So it's kind of like it's just like this weird line of like, how much do you give up for the benefit of having that information available to you if you were to need it? But the thing that I hadn't thought about before is, well, who has access to it and how are they protecting that? Because I think that's an even more important, because as more information gets collected, right? We were at an event. They said there was more data that's been created in the last year than all of recorded history.
Yeah, it grows exponentially.
Yeah, so the data will keep growing, and that data will be there. Someone will have it, but how are they? I guess protecting it is the most important part. So for all the security professionals out there listening, is maybe think of it from that lens as like, yes, you will continue to collect more, but you have to have policies in place that prevent unauthorized access or snooping. I can't think of a better word right now, but it's an interesting topic for sure. And I want to kind of see where it goes, but that's all we got time for this week. So appreciate you listening. Go ahead and drop a like so we know who's listening, and maybe leave a comment, show us some love, but we'll see you back next week. Thanks again for hanging out with us.
Ready or not, the logs are wide. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Corporate eyes in the dead of the night, catching the flicker of the laptop light. Ready or not, the cloud is full. Every keystroke is a digital pull. Are the guardrails up? Is the perimeter set? Or are we just dancing in a tangled net?
In a tangled net. They say telemetry's just data points in a lake, but they're measuring every single move that I make. I'm checking on Indeed for a friend, so I said, but the AI is reading what's inside of my head. Is it DLP? Or is it just HR spying? If I log in remote, is it worth even trying? My MacBook is humming, a constant machine, feeding the algorithm the ghost in the screen.
Ready or not, the logs are wide. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Corporate eyes in the dead of the night, catching the flicker of the laptop light. Ready or not, the cloud is full. Every keystroke is a digital pull. Are the guardrails up? Is the perimeter set? Or are we just dancing in a tangled net?
Flock cams on the corner catching every plate, tracking my crawl to the fast food gate. They say it's for safety to find a lost child, but the line between protection and control is getting wild. Troy talks about the logs and the audit of the team. Damien wants the data if it flows like a stream. But who is watcher in the high-res lens? But who is watching the high-res lens? Is it privacy for me? Is it privacy for me? Is it privacy for me or just privacy for my friends? Yeah.
Ready or not, the logs are wide. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Corporate eyes in the dead of the night, catching the flicker of the laptop light. Ready or not, the cloud is full. Every keystroke is a digital pull. Are the guardrails up? Is the perimeter set? Or are we just dancing in a tangled net?
Yeah, DTF, episode 51. Watch your back on the way to Hendy's. Troy, Damien, is Fern. Signing off. Get going.